Like a lot of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, this year's Zombies mode has undergone what might be described as a Warzone-ification, forcing its traditional PvE elements into a larger, more open map. But as popular as Warzone's extraction shooter mode, DMZ, might be, mixing it with zombies has diluted both. This is less a new take on zombies than it is a DMZ reskin, with disparate elements cherry-picked from both modes, mashed against one another and made to kiss. If you can stick with it long enough to reach high difficulty areas and top level content, it can take you to some excellent, intense moments. But its huge size and the slow pace created as a result often makes it feel at odds with what was fun about zombies in the past. Modern Warfare 3's Zombies mode, Operation Deadbolt, takes place on a version of the Urzikstan Warzone map. Gone are the usual wave-based battles through smaller, dedicated maps. Instead, the gist here is almost exactly what you encounter in DMZ. You and 2 squad mates head into the map, searching for cool stuff and completing activities called contracts to earn money for upgrades and items. Then you call a helicopter to escape with your loot before you're either overwhelmed or the 45-minute match timer expires. In the early going, apart from the zombies themselves and a few familiar temporary power-ups and perk colas, this Zombies mode doesn't feel much like zombies at all. The openness of DMZ lets you choose your battles, and that's the approach that defines Operation Deadbolt, but it lacks DMZ's player vs. player aspect. You can only interact with the 24 other players in a match cooperatively, which removes an element of danger. You'll pick your way across the map, generally venturing into areas designated with higher difficulty once you're fully prepared. Without the PvP aspect, the lower difficulty areas and activities end up being pretty dull. The slower and more thoughtful gameplay of DMZ contrasts with the usual setup of zombies, which is all about the mounting tension of finding better weapons, setting up defenses, and exploring the map while constantly fighting off ever tougher waves of enemies. The lack of a pressing threat in Operation Deadbolt means you can spend a whole session on low difficulty, relatively boring activities, just to prepare for something more interesting later. The 2 different gameplay approaches do eventually start to gel much better as you explore deeper. Enemies get deadlier as you move closer to Urzikstan's center, and those high-threat areas increase the intensity of battles and elevate all the things that make both DMZ and past zombies exciting. The differences between the 3 difficulty zones are stark. For example, Threat Level 2 has zombies that you can barely deal with using your base weapons, and it's rife with special zombies that show up at random much more often. Things are even tougher in Threat Level 3, where even regular zombies are decked out in armor, and giant boss monsters maraud freely. Just crossing the map in these areas requires you to pay much more attention. And once the challenge starts to ramp up, the traditional zombies gameplay elements are much more important. Having the right perk colas and seeking out pack-a-punch machines becomes the difference between a successful session and a painful defeat. The extraction mechanics of DMZ add exactly the right kind of rising dread as you fight to protect your exfiltration helicopter from huge throngs of zombies. Planning your trips becomes essential, but all the different enemies, weapons, upgrades, equipment, and random short-lived zombies power-ups you can find along the way combine to make sessions exciting and unpredictable. Add to that the fear of losing everything you've earned in a run, and Operation Deadbolt can get even an undead heart pumping. The inclusion of other players in a match can also add an unexpected, fun dimension deeper in. Finding other players and teaming up with them on the fly to make a double-sized squad, or getting revived by a passerby, adds a life to zombies that's new to the experience. Co-op with other random players isn't a big focus, but it still gives you another opportunity to shake things up. The trouble is that even when the DMZ and zombies elements mesh nicely, Operation Deadbolt's pacing is super uneven. A lot of time is spent on powering yourself up so you can risk the areas that are actually entertaining, and while the possibility of death adds necessary tension, scouring the map for equipment after a loss is a big, boring time suck. The story suffers the most from this slow pace, deployed through uninspired, MMO-like mini-objectives. Complete enough of them and you'll get to play a dedicated story mission, but it took me 24 tedious hours before I could even see what Operation Deadbolt's plot was about. There are some fun objectives, like the ones that push you to engage with mercenary strongholds or zombie nests, but the majority are dull and annoying. One tasked me with using explosive ammo to knock armor off certain zombies, so first I had to track down Shatterblast ammo, either from random contracts or loot stashes. But armored zombies are rare outside of threat level 2 or 3, so then I had to gear up enough to hunt some down. Explosions from the ammo happen randomly only once or twice per magazine, so I had to hope that the right bullet would come out of my gun while I was shooting them. And if I couldn't complete the objective before we had to exfiltrate, I needed to go find another Shatterblast ammo upgrade in the next session. Progress on these story quests is often a pain to earn. These are the sort of objectives you should be knocking out as you do other, more fun things. But Operation Deadbolt locks you into only working on one at a time, which you choose before you start. If you do manage to clear an objective, you get access to a new one automatically mid-session, but you can't change them on the fly or work on several at once, which means there's no way to make progress if you don't have the correct equipment. This approach repeatedly grinds your ability to advance the story to a complete, irritating halt. Once I finally unlocked the first of 3 story missions, Treyarch released an update that came with a game-breaking bug blocking access to those missions altogether. So that's where I have to tap out. And honestly, after all the tedium and frustration, whatever interest I had in the story evaporated a long time ago. Even if they weren't inaccessible, I can't imagine a couple of dedicated story missions are going to redeem all the time wasted trying to unlock them.
Standing by at LZ. Get on board and keep the hostiles off me.
Other bugs make the sloggy progression worse throughout. My experience on PC has seen 5 or 6 crashes to desktop and a few losses of connectivity. Each of these are treated as a failed run in Zombies, which means that through no fault of your own, you lose your gear to technical snafus. Along with some smaller issues like lag and stuttering, it's enough to kill otherwise fun runs and sap the desire to keep going back.
There's a fully loaded Terminus LTV and they're just begging to be off-inched.
Operation Deadbolt's attempt to reanimate Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3's Zombies mode by merging it with the machinery of DMZ isn't always successful, but it's not an inherently bad idea. When you start hitting on the right combinations of difficulty, planning, and random chance, it leads to intense moments that leverage some of the best ideas from both. But what's fun here is frequently undercut by way too much time spent grinding for gear needed to survive the tough enemies in the center of the map, the busywork story objectives, and the crashes that can kill any desire to play. Operation Deadbolt has great moments of tough battles against gross monsters that had me full of panic and dread, but only if I was willing to put in a lot of time and effort to make them happen. For more on Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, check out our reviews of the campaign and multiplayer modes, and for everything else, stick to IGN.